Marcus Hall walked into class with the highest grade in the room. Yet when the professor praised the top student, his name wasn't even mentioned. The room froze. Marcus's hands still raised, his breath caught in his chest. Was it an oversight, or something far uglier? Because what happened next would not only expose his professor, but shake the entire campus. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The lecture hall was always packed, its wooden chairs lined in steep rows that made every cough, shuffle and whispered conversation echo 10 times louder. Yet no matter how much noise surrounded him, Marcus Hall always sat in quiet focus, his eyes trained on the front of the room where Professor Richard Lawson commanded the stage like it was his private theater. Marcus's notebook was filled edge to edge with neatly written outlines, citations, and quick summaries of landmark cases in political philosophies. He wrote in precise strokes, each page a reflection of how seriously he took the subject. Political science wasn't just a major to him, it was his way of proving that his mother's sacrifices, all those double shifts at the hospital, meant something. Still, no matter how ready he was, whenever Marcus's hand went up, it was as if he dissolved into thin air. His arm would hover in the air longer than anyone else's, his shoulders tightening as his pulse drummed in his ears. But inevitably, Professor Lawson's gaze would drift past him, finding a hand 2 rows over or 3 seats down. "Excellent point, Julia," Lawson would say with a proud smile. "Or that's exactly the kind of framing we need, Ethan." And Marcus would slowly lower his hand, his jaw tightening, his pen tapping against the notebook, as if it could release the frustration that was building like steam inside him. What hurt wasn't just being ignored, it was the moments when he knew he had the sharper answer. Once during a heated discussion on constitutional interpretation, Marcus whispered a response under his breath. Seconds later, another student repeated nearly the exact same phrasing, and Lawson praised them for their insightful analysis. Marcus had smiled bitterly to himself. He wasn't surprised anymore. Being overlooked had become routine, almost predictable, like clockwork. But outside of class, the whispers about Marcus were different. "Paul? Yeah, he's the smartest guy in here," a student once admitted in the library. "Too bad Lawson never seems to see it. Man, if he's not picked for the debate team, it'll be a crime," another said during lunch, shaking his head as if even the thought were absurd. Because everyone knew, the National Collegiate Debate Competition was coming. It was the crown jewel of the department, the event where schools sent their sharpest minds to battle it out with argument and logic. Winning wasn't just a trophy, it was prestige, internships, and a direct line to graduate school doors that otherwise stayed locked. Marcus had been preparing for this since freshman year. He studied not just course material, but debate footage online, transcripts from past champions, and the art of rhetoric itself. He practiced late into the night in front of the mirror, teaching himself cadence, timing, and how to lace logic with emotion. His peers assumed he was a natural choice. Even those who didn't particularly like Marcus admitted he had a commanding voice when he spoke, a way of threading ideas that made people sit up straighter. But in the eyes of one man, Professor Richard Lawson, that brilliance never quite seemed to shine. Lawson was respected on campus, the kind of professor who published books on American governance and had connections with think tanks in Washington. He was charismatic in front of an audience, loved to challenge students with hard questions, and was often praised for his rigorous standards. Yet Marcus noticed something most others didn't: who Lawson chose to spotlight, and who he allowed to fade. The patterns weren't always obvious, but for Marcus the sting was sharp. Students who looked a certain way, dressed a certain way, spoke with a certain ease. They got the nods, the compliments, the mentorship. Marcus, despite his flawless work, remained invisible. The days leading up to the announcement were thick with tension. Students whispered about who would make the cut, trading predictions in hushed tones like gamblers betting on horses. Names floated easily: Julia, Ethan, Rachel, favorites Lawson often praised in class. Marcus's name was there too, passed around in conversations with a confidence that made him both proud and nervous. "Dude, you're a lock," one student said, clapping him on the shoulder. "If Lawson doesn't pick you, then the whole thing's rigged." Marcus smiled politely, but said nothing. He had learned long ago not to let confidence turn into hope too quickly. Hope had a way of turning into a bruise when you were overlooked. The morning of the announcement, the air was sharp with anticipation. Students crowded into the lecture hall, buzzing with chatter. Lawson stood at the front with a sheet of paper in his hands, looking every bit the judge about to deliver a verdict. Marcus sat in the third row, his stomach coiled in knots. He had dressed carefully that day. Clean blazer, pressed shirt, polished shoes. His mother always told him presentation mattered twice as much for him. He hated how true that felt. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lawson began, his voice steady. "As you know, our university takes pride in selecting only the most capable and articulate representatives for the National Collegiate Debate Competition. This is a serious stage, one that requires not just intelligence but composure, teamwork, and the ability to represent this institution with excellence." The room quieted. Marcus's hands curled around his pen. Lawson cleared his throat, scanning the list. This year's team will be led by Julia Myers, Ethan Brooks, and Rachel Whitman. Supporting them will be Daniel Kim and Olivia Carter. Congratulations to all of you. The room erupted with applause, shouts, and excited chatter. Julia and Ethan exchanged high fives. Rachel clapped with her friends, glowing with the kind of confidence that came from being expected to win. But Marcus sat frozen. His name hadn't been called. He felt the air drain from his chest as if someone had punched him without touching him. He glanced quickly at the paper in Lawson's hands, hoping maybe he had misheard, that his name might still be there in smaller print, in some backup role, but it wasn't. Lawson folded the paper neatly and placed it on the podium, smiling at the chosen students, as if they were his prodigies. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he closed his notebook. His classmates barely noticed him in that moment, too busy congratulating the winners. But a few cast him quick glances, surprised, even confused. One mouthed silently, "What? Not you?" Marcus forced himself to stay composed, his face expressionless, but inside, his chest burned. His mind raced through excuses. Maybe Lawson thought he was too young. Maybe he wanted to give others a chance. But deep down, Marcus knew it wasn't about youth or fairness. It was about something else. Something Lawson had never said out loud. But Marcus could feel it in the way the professor's eyes slid past him, in the silence that followed whenever his hand was in the air. As the applause faded and students gathered their things, Marcus remained in his seat, staring blankly at the floor. Around him, the world carried on. Laughter, chatter, footsteps. But inside, everything felt muted, like he had been sealed behind glass. It wasn't just about being left off the list. It was about being told, silently but unmistakably, that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how much he prepared, someone like him didn't belong on that stage. And as he finally stood to leave, his notebook pressed tightly against his chest, Marcus made a quiet vow to himself. This wasn't the end of the story. He refused to let it be. But what he didn't know, what none of the students knew, was that the real reason Lawson had excluded him wasn't hidden in silence. It was about to be revealed, in words not meant for Marcus to ever hear. When the selection list was announced, Marcus's name was missing. The announcement hung in Marcus's mind like a sentence that refused to end. He walked out of the lecture hall with his notebook pressed so tightly to his chest, it left faint creases on his shirt. Behind him, laughter and congratulations echoed down the corridor as Julia, Ethan, and Rachel basked in their selection. Their joy was real, but to Marcus, each cheer sounded like a door slamming in his face. He moved slowly, head low, blending into the tide of students rushing to their next classes. No one stopped him. No one asked him how he felt. And that, Marcus thought, was the truest reflection of his position. Present but unseen. By the time he reached the library, his legs felt heavy, but sitting still wasn't an option. If he stayed in his dorm, the silence would swallow him whole. The library, at least, carried a kind of order. The rows of books, the whisper of turning pages, the occasional cough. It was predictable. He dropped into a chair at a table near the back, the kind of spot where no one ever looked twice, and opened his notes. For hours he read case studies and constitutional commentaries. He underlined passages, scribbled summaries, and even rehearsed arguments quietly under his breath. The motions kept him steady, but underneath, his disappointment grew heavier by the minute. Because it wasn't just about not making the team. It was about knowing he had prepared harder than most of the chosen names. It was about the subtle pattern that had been repeating since freshman year. The memory replayed itself. Professor Lawson's eyes gliding past him during class discussions, his praise reserved for others. Lawson would call Marcus's work solid or thorough, never exceptional or brilliant. Words that lifted others seemed to flatten when directed at him. And now, this being passed over for the very competition Marcus had shaped his college life around. Late into the evening, the library emptied. Students who had celebrated earlier had long gone off to parties. Their laughter carried faintly through the campus night. Marcus, however, stayed. His books formed a fortress around him, but the silence pressed against his chest like a weight. At one point he pulled out his phone and hovered over his mother's contact. He imagined her voice warm but tired, carrying that unshakable faith in him. She had always said, "Baby, you're destined for big things. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But he couldn't dial. He couldn't tell her that the dream she'd worked herself ragged to support had just slipped through his fingers. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because someone decided not to see him. Instead, he shoved the phone back into his pocket, his jaw tightening. The thought circled in his mind. Was it really about merit, or was it about the skin I wear every day? The question lingered with him long after he left the library. He walked across campus under the orange glow of the street lamps, the cold air stinging his face. Groups of students passed him, their laughter spilling into the night. None of them looked his way. When he reached his dorm, Marcus didn't turn on the lights. He dropped his bag on the desk, sat on the edge of his bed, and stared at the floor. Silence wrapped around him again, and he let it, sinking deeper into it, until exhaustion pulled him into sleep. The next few days followed the same pattern. Marcus went to class, listened, took notes, raised his hand only to be ignored. Then he went to the library, where he drowned himself in study. He kept his disappointment locked inside, showing no cracks, no outward sign of how deeply the exclusion cut him. But others noticed anyway. "Man, I thought you'd be on the team," a student said casually one afternoon in the dining hall. "Crazy that Lawson left you out." Marcus only shrugged, forcing a polite smile. "It's fine. They've got a strong group." Inside, though, the words burned. He wanted to say, "It's not fine. It's not fair. You know it. I know it. Everyone knows it." But instead he swallowed the fire, burying it under layers of restraint. Even his closest acquaintances didn't hear the truth. He told no one, not even his mother. Each phone call with her was the same. She asked how classes were, how he was eating, whether he was sleeping. He answered with careful lies. "It's going well, Mom. Don't worry about me." She would laugh softly, relief in her tone. "I never worry about you, Marcus. You're too smart not to shine." Those words made his chest tighten. He wanted to believe her. But what if brilliance wasn't enough? What if the system was designed to dim certain lights, no matter how brightly they burned? The thought haunted him as the days stretched on. The debate team began practicing in reserved classrooms, their laughter and voices spilling into the halls. Sometimes Marcus passed them, catching snippets of arguments, counter-arguments, strategies. His body would stiffen, his hands itching to join, to contribute, to prove he belonged. But each time, he walked past in silence, the weight pressing heavier. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was anger, quiet but sharp, tucked into his chest like a blade. One Thursday evening, Marcus stayed late in the political science building, combing through old debate transcripts in the hallway outside Lawson's office. The building was mostly empty, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. He didn't expect anyone else to be around. But as he gathered his books, a voice drifted from Lawson's office. The door was slightly ajar. Marcus froze, the sound pulling him in. "I just don't think he fits the image," Lawson was saying, his tone calm, almost casual. Another voice. A student's responded. Marcus couldn't quite place who it was. But Marcus is sharp. Everyone knows it. You've seen the way he breaks down arguments. Lawson sighed. The sound heavy. Sharp. Yes. But presentation matters. Judges don't respond well when a competitor sounds too urban, too forceful. It comes across as aggressive, even when the arguments are valid. Marcus's stomach dropped. He pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering. The student hesitated. "So you're saying he wasn't picked because of how he sounds?" Lawson's voice lowered, but the words cut like glass. "I'm saying this competition is about optics, as much as it is about intellect. Some students, no matter how intelligent, just don't represent the kind of image we want to put forward." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Marcus's breath caught in his throat, rage and disbelief colliding inside him. It wasn't about merit. It wasn't about fairness. It was about him, his voice, his presence, his skin. His hands trembled as he clutched his books, the weight of the words pressing heavier than any stack of case studies ever had. For the first time, Marcus saw clearly He hadn't been invisible by accident. He had been deliberately erased. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. An overheard conversation between Professor Lawson and another student revealed a chilling reason Marcus wasn't picked. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, the hum of fluorescent lights above him nearly drowned out by the pounding of his own heart. Every word that slipped from Professor Lawson's office etched itself deeper into his chest, each syllable a blade. Urban, forceful, aggressive. The words weren't just descriptive. They were coded, laced with centuries of stereotypes that reduced black voices to threats. No matter how thoughtful, no matter how refined. Marcus had heard similar things before, though never spoken so plainly. He had grown up noticing how teachers praised his passion when they didn't know what else to call his precision. How strangers told him to calm down even when he spoke calmly. But hearing it from Lawson, his professor, the man entrusted with shaping futures, made it different, more personal. He pressed his back against the wall, trying to breathe silently, trying not to give himself away. Inside the office, Lawson's voice carried again, measured and authoritative. Look, it's not about Marcus's intelligence. I've graded his work. He's competent, thorough, sometimes even insightful. But debate isn't just about facts. It's about how you package those facts. And let's be honest, certain judges, they react better to a Julia or an Ethan. Someone polished, someone safe. The student in Lawson's office shifted uneasily, their chair creaking. But isn't that unfair? There was a pause before Lawson replied, his tone almost paternal. Unfair? Maybe. But this is the real world. My job is to win. I can't gamble on someone who might turn a judge's bias against us. The competition is political in more ways than one. You'll understand that when you've been around longer. Marcus's hand tightened on the edge of his books, until the corners dug into his skin. So it wasn't just about him being overlooked. It was calculated, deliberate. He wanted to burst into the office, to demand Lawson look him in the eye, and say those words directly. He wanted to shatter the smug calmness in that voice. But he didn't move. He could. The weight of being a black student, in that moment, pressed hard against his chest. He knew how it would be spun. If he stormed in, he'd be angry. If he demanded fairness, he'd be entitled. If he raised his voice, he'd be aggressive, just like Lawson had claimed. So Marcus stayed in the hallway, silent, every muscle locked in restraint. The conversation inside wound down. The student muttered something too faint for Marcus to catch, and then Lawson gave a curt, dismissive laugh. Trust me, this is for the best. The scrape of a chair followed. Marcus panicked, realizing someone was about to come out. He ducked down the hallway, slipping into an alcove near the vending machines. From there he watched as a student, Rachel Whitman, one of the selected debaters, exited Lawson's office, clutching a folder. Her face was flushed, unsettled, as though she wasn't entirely convinced by Lawson's reasoning. Marcus remained hidden until her footsteps faded. Then, carefully, he slipped out of the building, into the night air. The cold hit him instantly, sharp against his skin, but it wasn't enough to cool the fire inside him. Walking back across campus, Marcus replayed the words in his head. Not polished, too urban, too forceful, aggressive. It wasn't his talent they doubted. It was who he was, how he looked, how he sounded. He realized with sick clarity that he had been labeled before he even had the chance to prove himself. His identity wasn't invisible. It was visible in the worst way, reduced to a stereotype before he could even open his mouth. Back in his dorm room, Marcus sat at his desk, his books still clutched tightly in his hands. The quiet hum of his mini-fridge filled the silence. He stared at the wall, his vision blurring with tears he refused to let fall. How many times had this happened without him knowing? How many times had a door been closed before he even reached it? Because someone assumed he didn't fit the image. He remembered his mother's sacrifices, her hands swollen from working overtime shifts, her tired smile as she told him education would protect him. He thought about his younger cousins back home, kids who looked up to him, who believed he was proof that brilliance could carry them through. Was he supposed to just accept this? To stay silent, to keep playing small so others would stay comfortable? The idea dug into him, bitter and suffocating. Hours passed, the night deepening around him. Marcus didn't move from the desk. He sat there, listening to the faint laughter outside his window from students celebrating the debate team's victory by selection. Each cheer was another needle, but it also sharpened something in him. Anger was no longer just a wound. It was a spark. At first he thought about filing a complaint. Maybe going to the dean. Maybe telling someone what he overheard. But as quickly as the thought came, he knew how it would end. Lawson was respected, powerful, connected. Marcus was a student, with no proof. Just words he wasn't supposed to hear. Who would believe him? He imagined the headline of that story. Disgruntled student lashes out after not being chosen. No, that wouldn't work. If he wanted to change anything, he couldn't rely on complaints or whispers. He needed something undeniable. Something public. Something they couldn't erase or excuse. That's when the thought struck him. The competition itself. He had heard about the open qualifiers, a small overlooked pathway for students who weren't officially chosen by their universities, but wanted to prove themselves. Few attempted it, and even fewer succeeded. But it existed. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What if I win anyway? What if I forced them to see me on that stage? The idea electrified him. It was reckless, dangerous, and bold, but it was also the only way. If Lawson wouldn't let him in through the front door, Marcus would find a side door, even if it meant breaking it open with his bare hands. His mind raced, calculating the risks. If he failed, he'd confirm Lawson's words that he wasn't polished, that he didn't belong. He'd humiliate himself. He'd become the cautionary tale whispered about for years. But if he succeeded, Lawson's excuses would crumble in public view. Everyone would see what Marcus had known all along, that his brilliance wasn't just real, it was undeniable. The thought burned in him, until it became resolve. He opened his laptop, searching for the open qualifier details. The screen glowed against his face in the darkness. The words sharp and clear. Applications open until midnight Friday. He had 2 days. 2 days to prepare, to craft arguments, to sharpen his delivery, to prove not just to Lawson but to everyone who had ever dismissed him that his voice belonged. As Marcus stared at the application form, a mix of fear and determination swirled in his chest. The decision weighed heavy, but the path was clear. He wasn't going to wait for permission. He wasn't going to ask to be seen. He was going to take the stage himself. And for the first time since the announcement, Marcus felt something stronger than anger. He felt purpose. Marcus decided he would enter the competition without Lawson's permission. Marcus sat at his desk that night with the glow of his laptop reflecting in his eyes. The application form for the open qualifiers was still pulled up on the screen, its deadline staring back at him like a dare. Midnight Friday. 2 days. It wasn't just an opportunity, it was a countdown. He filled in his name, his year, his major. When the final button blinked submit, his heart pounded so loudly he thought it might echo through the dorm walls. The decision was sealed now. There was no turning back. The moment the confirmation email arrived, Marcus leaned back in his chair, his chest heaving. He wasn't on Lawson's team, but he wasn't going to sit quietly while others took the stage. He was going to prepare, but he knew he would have to prepare differently. Without official support, he had no coach, no teammates, no resources. What he had was grit, determination, and the endless reservoir of anger that had now sharpened into focus. He started with the basics, digging through old debate recordings archived on YouTube and university websites. His browser history became a timeline of late nights, spent replaying champions' strategies, pausing mid-speech to jot down phrasing, transitions, and frameworks. He studied how the best debaters handled pressure, how they dismantled an opponent's point without raising their voice, how they balanced passion with composure. He mimicked them in the mirror, rehearsing until his own reflection became both opponent and ally. His dorm room echoed with arguments about policy, philosophy, and law. At first he stumbled, his hands too stiff, his rhythm awkward, his sentences too heavy with frustration. But with each attempt, his voice steadied, his delivery sharpened. He whispered through arguments at first, careful not to wake his roommate, who often fell asleep with headphones on. But by midnight, Marcus's volume would rise, his cadence stronger, his words slicing through the silence. Sometimes he startled himself, pausing to breathe, to remind himself that this wasn't just practice, it was survival. Meanwhile, across campus, the official debate team trained under Lawson's watchful eye. Marcus caught glimpses of them laughing in the hallways, bragging about strategies, and posting photos of their sessions on social media. Julia and Ethan stood in the center of every picture, arms draped around each other's shoulders, their captions dripping with confidence, ready to dominate nationals. Best team Lawson's ever picked. Each post was like salt in Marcus's wound. But instead of breaking him, it fueled him. They had a professor, a support system, and the full backing of the school. Marcus had nothing but his anger and his books, and that was exactly why he had to win. The days blurred into one another. Marcus ate quickly, skipped social gatherings, and stayed buried in research. He dissected frameworks on morality versus legality, capitalism versus equity, utilitarianism versus justice. He combed through policy briefs, government reports, and op-eds until his laptop burned hot against his skin. He knew his disadvantage. He didn't have the polish Lawson demanded. He wasn't going to magically transform into the type of safe competitor the professor believed the judges wanted. But Marcus realized something important. He didn't want to. He didn't want to be the voice Lawson wished for. He wanted to be the voice Lawson had tried to erase. Still, Marcus needed more than passion. He needed tactics. So he created a system. He wrote down every possible opening statement he could think of, filling pages with hooks that could grab an audience within seconds. He practiced responses to hypothetical cross-examinations, imagining the sharpest questions his opponents could throw at him. He recorded himself on his phone, playing it back with a critical ear, wincing when he caught filler words, adjusting when he noticed his tone wavered. One night, he played a recording back and froze at his own reflection in the mirror. His voice sounded strong, deliberate, commanding. It startled him. He didn't sound like the boy Lawson ignored in the classroom. He sounded like someone meant for the stage. Still, doubt lurked. At times, Marcus would slump onto his bed, staring at the ceiling. What if Lawson was right? What if the judges heard me and saw exactly what he sees? Too urban, too aggressive. But each time, another thought pushed back harder. What if they don't? What if I finally make them listen? That tension between fear of confirming the stereotype and hope of shattering it drove him harder than any coach ever could. By the fourth night, Marcus's body ached from lack of sleep. His eyes burned, his throat felt raw, but he didn't stop. He reminded himself that the team was training with structure, while he was forging his own weapon in secret. And sometimes, the blade you sharpen alone is the one no one expects. He also found himself drawn deeper into the substance of the arguments. The debates weren't just intellectual exercises for him anymore. They mirrored his own life. When he practiced on topics about justice, equity, or systemic bias, his words flowed faster, sharper, because he wasn't just debating policy. He was debating his own reality. There was one night, however, when something unexpected happened. He was in the common lounge at nearly 2 a.m., pacing back and forth with a notepad, rehearsing aloud. He thought the building was empty, but when he paused, he noticed a figure in the corner, a janitor mopping quietly. The man looked up, listening for a moment. "You practicing for something?" the janitor asked, his voice low, calm. Marcus hesitated, embarrassed. "Yeah, debate competition." The man nodded, leaning on the mop handle. "Sound like you mean every word. That counts for something." Marcus didn't know what to say, but the man smiled faintly. "Don't forget, folks remember conviction more than polish. If you believe it, they will too." The words struck Marcus harder than he expected. Here was someone with no stake in the competition, no bias, no judgment, just a passing observation, and yet it felt more like coaching than anything he'd gotten from Lawson in 2 years. That night, Marcus practiced with renewed intensity. Conviction. That was his weapon. By Friday morning, the day of the application deadline, Marcus's desk was buried in notes. His mirror covered in sticky notes with reminders. Breathe. Don't rush. Command silence. Lead with truth. Exhaustion weighed on him, but adrenaline carried him through. He went to class, but his mind wasn't on Lawson's lectures. He scribbled arguments in the margins of his notebook instead, ignoring Lawson's dismissive glance when he didn't participate. By late afternoon, he felt both ready and terrified. He had honed himself in secret, in silence, while the world assumed he was invisible. But inside, Marcus knew something had changed. He wasn't just reacting to being excluded anymore. He was building towards something larger. And then just before dinner, as Marcus scrolled absent-mindedly through the university website on his laptop, he saw it. A banner at the bottom of the page tucked beneath the debate competition updates, glowing faintly in bold letters. National Debate Open Qualifiers. Individual applicants welcome. Marcus's breath caught. He leaned closer, clicking the link. A page opened, detailing the rules. Unlike the official team bracket, this path allowed independent students to compete without institutional backing. It was rare, but the door was real. His pulse quickened as he read. This wasn't just a chance. It was the chance. The very loophole he needed. He sat back staring at the screen, his heart hammering in his chest. For the first time, Marcus saw not just the possibility of proving Lawson wrong, but of exposing him. If Marcus could make it through the qualifiers and onto the national stage, everyone, his peers, his university, the judges, the world, would have to face the truth Lawson had tried to bury. The thought electrified him, the weight of the past weeks lifting slightly. But with that hope came fear. Because this wasn't just preparation anymore. This was war. Marcus stumbled upon an announcement that could change everything. Open qualifiers for individuals. The morning of the qualifiers broke cold and gray, the kind of day where the air felt heavy even before the first step out of bed. Marcus woke before his alarm, sitting at the edge of his mattress with his blazer folded neatly on the chair beside him. It wasn't new, not like the sleek jackets the official team wore, but he had pressed it carefully the night before, smoothing out wrinkles, until it looked respectable. He dressed slowly, his fingers trembling as he buttoned his shirt. The mirror above his desk reflected someone who looked calm on the surface, but Marcus could feel the storm underneath. His pulse raced, his chest rising and falling too quickly, as if the weight of the entire room pressed on him. When he walked across campus toward the auditorium where sign-ups were held, heads turned. A few students from Lawson's class spotted him and whispered. Some snickered. "You hear Marcus is trying the open qualifiers." One voice floated in the breeze, sharp enough to sting. "Yeah, bold move. Too bad he's just setting himself up. He'll choke." Lawson knew better. Marcus kept walking, his eyes forward, his jaw tight. He wanted to shout back, but silence was his weapon today. Inside the building, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. The registration table was crowded with students from other universities, each accompanied by a coach or mentor. Clipboards were passed around, names signed with confidence. Marcus moved quietly to the end of the line, gripping his pen so tightly the knuckles whitened. When it was his turn, the woman at the desk looked up, surprised. "University representation," she asked. Marcus swallowed. "Independent. Open qualifier." Her eyes flicked briefly with curiosity, maybe even doubt. But she nodded, writing it down. He signed his name, handed the clipboard back, and stepped away, his heart pounding like he had just crossed the first hurdle. The waiting area was filled with energy, students in blazers rehearsing under their breath, coaches whispering last-minute strategies. Marcus sat alone in the corner, pulling out his notepad. His pages were messy now, filled with annotations and half-scribbled counters. He flipped through them not to memorize but to anchor himself. As his name was eventually called, Marcus rose. His legs felt heavy but steady, carrying him toward the stage. The room opened up before him, rows of seats filled with students, mentors and judges sitting at the long table with notepads ready. Their expressions were neutral, practiced. Marcus stepped to the podium. The microphone buzzed faintly. As he adjusted it, a wave of silence spread across the room. He felt the doubt pressing in, invisible but sharp. He saw it in the way some students leaned back, whispering as if they already knew how this would end. He gripped the edges of the podium, his palms damp. For a second, the words he had rehearsed so many times seemed to scatter like ashes. His throat tightened, but then he remembered the janitor's words. Folks remember conviction more than polish. Marcus exhaled. When he spoke, his voice came out steady, rich, carrying across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, debate isn't about who looks the part. It isn't about who fits an image. It's about who can carry the truth in words that can't be ignored." A ripple of silence followed. Even the whispers stopped. He launched into his opening argument, weaving logic with passion. His delivery was precise but not mechanical, sharp but not rushed. He dissected policy frameworks, cited historical parallels, and pulled threads from philosophy that tied seamlessly to real-world consequences. His cadence built gradually, each sentence striking harder than the last, until the judges leaned forward, pens poised but unmoving, their attention fixed. What set Marcus apart wasn't just the clarity of his logic, it was the weight behind it. Every word carried his lived reality, his determination not to be erased. Students who had smirked earlier now sat straighter, their expressions shifting from smugness to disbelief. By the time Marcus reached his conclusion, the room felt charged, as if his conviction had filled every corner. "Debate isn't theater," Marcus said, his voice ringing with finality. "It's the collision of truth and perception, and when truth stands unshaken, perception must yield." That's why we're here. Not to sound safe, but to make sure justice has a voice. He stepped back from the podium. Silence hung for a beat, thick, heavy, before the room erupted into applause. Marcus's chest rose and fell, his breath shaky. For the first time in weeks, he felt seen. Not by Lawson, not by his classmates, but by the raw attention of a room that had no choice but to hear him. The judges scribbled notes quickly, whispering among themselves. Their expressions were unreadable, but Marcus caught a flicker of surprise in one of their eyes. When he returned to his seat, the whispers around him were different now. Not mocking, not dismissive. Curious, respectful. Where did he come from? Someone muttered. Independent? Seriously? He sounded better than half the teams with coaches. Marcus sat quietly, his notebook closed on his lap, his hands still trembling slightly. He didn't smile. Not yet. He knew the battle wasn't over. The scores hadn't been announced, but something inside him shifted. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting to be heard. He was winning that fight. The rounds continued. Marcus competed again, this time facing off against a student from Yale. The opponent came polished, sharp, practiced in cross-examination. For a few minutes, Marcus stumbled under the intensity, his nerves threatening to unravel him. But then he found his rhythm again, leaning not on polish, but on conviction. He answered each question with calm precision, reframing challenges into opportunities. He built his case layer by layer, until even his opponent's strongest point seemed flimsy against his steady fire. By the end of that round, murmurs spread through the room again, not disbelief this time, but recognition. When the final speaker stepped down, and the judges retreated to deliberate, Marcus sat with his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each minute dragging against the weight of his anticipation. He thought of his mother, working her shift with no idea her son was standing on a stage no one expected him to reach. He thought of Lawson, whose words had nearly broken him. He thought of the students who laughed, who whispered. And then, finally, the judges returned. The head judge cleared his throat, holding a sheet of paper. Today's top 3 qualifiers, who will advance to the national stage, are as follows. The room hushed. Every breath held. First, Julia Myers, representing Westfield University. Polite applause filled the room. Marcus's stomach tightened, his pulse in his ears. Second, Ethan Brooks, representing Westfield University. More applause. The sound made Marcus's chest ache. 2 of Lawson's chosen students were through. His doubts rushed back, pressing hard. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe Lawson was right. And third. The judge paused, scanning the paper before looking out over the audience. Marcus Hall, independent applicant. The room erupted, not just applause this time, but genuine astonishment. Heads turned, whispers broke out, and eyes searched for him, as if they needed confirmation that someone outside the system had broken through. Marcus sat frozen for a second, his chest burning, his throat tight. Then slowly, he rose, the applause washing over him like a tide he never thought he'd feel. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. He was undeniable. His scores placed him in the top 3, qualifying him for the main national stage. The news spread faster than Marcus expected. By Monday morning, whispers trailed behind him like shadows. He could feel it when he walked through the dining hall, tray in hand. Conversations dipped when he passed, eyes flicked toward him before darting away. Some students looked at him with curiosity, others with irritation, and a few with open disbelief. Did you hear? He qualified. Marcus? From our class? Yeah, independent entry. Got top 3. No way. That's unbelievable. But alongside the surprise came a different tone, sharp and biting. He's just showing off. Got lucky. That's all. Yeah, but do you really think judges will take him seriously on the national stage? The comments stung, not because they surprised Marcus, but because they confirmed what he already knew. His success wasn't going to be celebrated. It was going to be challenged, dissected, doubted. In the library, where he once found silence, Marcus now heard his name floating through hushed conversations. In the hallway, students' laughter carried an edge when he walked by, as though they wanted him to hear but couldn't say it directly. And then came the online forum. It started with a thread on the campus discussion board. Independent qualifier. Marcus Hall? The first replies were harmless enough. Shock. Speculation. But within hours the tone shifted. Yeah, he speaks well, but it's too street, you know? Doesn't sound professional. Exactly. Too much attitude in his voice. He's articulate but it's aggressive. Feels like he's arguing with you instead of debating. Lol, imagine him at nationals. Judges are gonna think they're being yelled at. Marcus scrolled through the comments in his dorm room. His jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He knew the code. He knew exactly what they meant by fit, attitude, aggressive. None of them could say the word, but it hung in every line like smoke. Then came the memes. Screenshots from his qualifier round were clipped and edited. His face frozen mid-sentence with captions like, "Chill bro, it's just a debate," or "when you argue with the waiter about your order." The cruelty wasn't clever, but it was relentless. Marcus closed his laptop, his chest burning. For a moment he wanted to disappear, to let the silence swallow him like it had so many times before. But then he remembered the applause in that qualifier room, the way the judges leaned forward, the way the whispers had shifted from disbelief to recognition. That was real. The comments online, they were noise. Still, the weight was heavy. On Tuesday, as he walked into political science class, Marcus felt the stares before he even sat down. Julia and Ethan were huddled in the front row, their voices low but their laughter sharp enough to carry. Rachel sat a few seats over, her expression unreadable, eyes flicking toward Marcus for a second before darting away. Lawson entered the room with his usual air of authority, but Marcus caught something in his glance, a flicker of annoyance, maybe even concern. Lawson didn't mention the qualifiers, didn't acknowledge Marcus at all. He simply launched into the lecture as though nothing had changed. But Marcus knew everything had changed. His presence in that room was no longer silent. It was disruptive. After class, a few students lingered near the doorway, their voices low but audible. "He thinks he's better than the team now. Bet Lawson's pissed. Imagine your unpicked student making it further than your chosen ones. Won't last long. Nationals will humble him." Marcus kept his gaze steady, walking past them without a word. But inside, each sentence scraped against him. By Wednesday the backlash grew sharper. Anonymous posts flooded the forums, mocking his voice, his style, even the way he dressed at the qualifier. One comment hit harder than the rest. "This isn't affirmative action. Debate is for the best, not for people trying to make a statement." Marcus read it twice, his vision blurring with rage. That wasn't just an insult, that was a knife, twisting deep, trying to erase every ounce of effort, every hour of practice, every truth he had spoken. And yet beneath the anger there was a grim clarity. The backlash wasn't just about him winning a spot. It was about him existing in a space no one thought he belonged. His success wasn't just questioned, it was treated as a threat. But Marcus refused to let their whispers define him. Each morning, he walked across campus with his shoulders straight, his face calm. He carried his books tightly, his steps steady. He knew the stares were there, the whispers just behind him. But he didn't turn, he didn't flinch. To the outside world, he looked unbothered, but inside, he was fighting every second not to let the weight crush him. Then came the unexpected twist. Thursday afternoon, as Marcus studied in the library, Rachel Whitman approached. She stood at the edge of his table, clutching her notebook, her expression conflicted. "Marcus," she said quietly. He looked up, wary. "Yeah?" She hesitated, glancing around as if afraid of being seen. "I just wanted to say what you did at the qualifiers was impressive. Really impressive." Marcus blinked, surprised. Of all people, Rachel was the last he expected support from. "But," she added quickly, lowering her voice, "you need to be careful. People are talking, not just students, faculty too." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" She shifted uncomfortably. "I overheard Professor Lawson. He's not happy. He thinks you're making the department look divided, like you're undermining his authority." Marcus's chest tightened. "I'm not undermining anything. I'm just—" "I know," Rachel interrupted. "But that's not how he sees it. Just watch your back, okay?" Before Marcus could reply, she turned and left, her footsteps fading quickly between the shelves. Marcus sat in stunned silence. His stomach churned, his pulse quickening. It wasn't just classmates whispering now. Lawson himself was preparing to act. And sure enough, the warning came sooner than he expected. On Friday morning, Marcus was walking down the main hallway of the political science building when he saw Lawson ahead, standing near his office door. Their eyes met, and for the first time Lawson didn't look past him. He looked directly at him, his expression cold, his mouth set in a hard line. Marcus's steps slowed, the hallway suddenly feeling narrower, the walls pressing in. Other students passed by, glancing curiously at the professor and his unchosen student facing each other in silence. Lawson waited until Marcus was close enough, then spoke, his voice low but firm, sharp enough to cut through the noise of the hallway. "Mr. Hall," he said, his eyes narrowing, "we need to talk about nationals, and about what will happen if you keep pushing this any further." Professor Lawson confronted Marcus in the hallway with a warning that could end his chance. The hallway stretched long and silent, but to Marcus, the air felt suffocating. Students passed around him, their chatter blending into a low hum, but his focus was locked entirely on the figure standing by the office door. Professor Richard Lawson, arms crossed, face tight, eyes narrowed with something colder than disapproval, something close to disdain. "Mr. Hall," Lawson repeated, his voice carrying the sharp edge of authority. "Step into my office." Marcus hesitated, every instinct telling him to keep walking, but the weight of the stairs around them pinned him in place. He followed Lawson inside, the door clicking shut with a finality that made Marcus's chest tighten. The office smelled of leather-bound books and polished wood, its walls lined with certificates and framed photographs of past debate teams. Every detail screamed prestige. Every detail reminded Marcus that this room was Lawson's territory. Lawson gestured toward a chair. "Sit." Marcus remained standing. "I'd prefer to stand." Lawson's lips curved into the faintest smirk. "Suit yourself." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "You've created quite the stir." Marcus stayed silent, his jaw set. "The qualifiers," Lawson continued. "Unexpected, impressive in a way, but problematic." He tilted his head slightly. "You understand that, don't you?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "What I understand is that I qualified, fair and square." Lawson sighed, as though speaking to a child who didn't grasp reality. "This isn't about rules, Marcus. It's about representation. When you step onto that national stage, you don't just represent yourself, you represent this institution. And frankly, I can't have you embarrassing the school." Marcus's fists tightened at his sides. Embarrassing the school? By succeeding? Lawson's tone hardened. By being unprepared. By lacking polish. By projecting an image that does not align with the standards this university upholds. The words landed like a blow. Marcus heard the code again, the same words he had overheard before. Polish, image, standards. None of it was about skill. All of it was about perception, about who fit and who didn't. "You mean by being me?" Marcus said quietly, his voice low but steady. Lawson didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "If that's how you choose to interpret it." The silence stretched heavy between them. Marcus's chest burned with anger, but he forced himself to breathe, to stay measured. Lawson continued, his voice calm, deliberate. "I'm going to give you a choice. Withdraw from the Nationals. Step aside gracefully. Show that you know your place. If you do that, I'll make sure doors remain open for you here. Recommendations. Internships. Quiet support." Marcus stared at him, disbelief flooding his veins. "And if I don't?" Lawson's expression darkened. "Then I will make sure those doors close. You think qualifying means you've won? Nationals will eat you alive. And when you fall, you'll have no safety net, no support. You'll be the boy who flew too close to the sun, and no one will remember your name." Marcus's breath caught. The threat wasn't subtle. It was sharp, deliberate, and final. Lawson wasn't just ignoring him anymore. He was determined to bury him. "Why?" Marcus asked finally, his voice quiet but filled with heat. "Why is it so hard for you to let me try, to let me stand on that stage?" For the first time, Lawson's mask slipped. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because students like you always mistake defiance for brilliance. You think one strong speech means you belong in every room. It doesn't. There are standards, Marcus, and you don't fit them." The words sliced through Marcus like glass. He stood frozen, his hands trembling at his sides, every muscle in his body begging to explode. But he forced himself to stay still, to meet Lawson's gaze without flinching. Finally, he spoke. "Then maybe it's time those standards change." Lawson's eyes hardened. "Then you'll regret it." The room fell silent again, the weight of the ultimatum pressing heavy against Marcus's chest. Finally, without another word, Marcus turned and walked out, his steps steady despite the storm raging inside him. In the hallway, his composure cracked. He leaned against the wall, sucking in a breath, his fists pressed tightly against his thighs. He wanted to scream, to throw something, to break the suffocating silence Lawson had wrapped around him. But he didn't. He straightened, exhaled slowly, and walked away. The rest of the day dragged, each class a blur. Students whispered louder now. The rumors swirling that Marcus had been talked to by Lawson. Some said Lawson was furious. Others claimed Marcus had disrespected him in his office. By evening, Marcus sat in the library again, his books open but his mind elsewhere. He replayed the conversation again and again, the words looping in his head. Show that you know your place. You don't fit. You'll regret it. He felt the weight pressing down harder than ever. Lawson wasn't just an obstacle. He was a wall, tall and immovable, backed by the power of the institution. For the first time, Marcus wondered if maybe he had been reckless. Maybe Lawson was right. Nationals wasn't just a stage. It was a battlefield. And Lawson had just made it clear he intended to send Marcus into it without armor. Marcus's phone buzzed on the desk, the sound startling him. He picked it up absent-mindedly, expecting another group text or a reminder about an assignment. But when he opened his inbox, his eyes widened. The subject line read, "Your performance at the qualifier." It was from Dr. Evelyn Carter, head debate coach at Eastbrook University, a program with national recognition. Marcus's pulse quickened as he opened the message. "Mr. Hall," it began, "I had the opportunity to observe your performance at the recent qualifier. I was struck not only by your clarity of thought, but by the conviction behind your delivery. Rarely does a competitor combine both so powerfully, especially without official support. I believe you have extraordinary potential. If you are willing, I would like to mentor you informally in preparation for nationals. Think of this as a bridge, not between institutions, but between a voice long ignored and a stage that desperately needs it." Marcus's hands trembled as he read the email again. He blinked, hardly believing it. Someone had seen him. Not just seen, but believed. The heaviness that had been suffocating him all day cracked slightly, a sliver of light breaking through. Lawson had given him an ultimatum. A door slammed shut. But now here was another door, unexpected, unlikely, but real, swinging open. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his chest rising and falling quickly. For the first time in days, the weight didn't feel so crushing. Because if Lawson was determined to bury him, then Marcus had just found someone willing to help him rise. Marcus secretly received an email invitation from a national debate coach who had noticed his qualifier performance. Marcus reread the email at least 5 times, each word cutting through the fog of Lawson's ultimatum. Extraordinary potential, a voice long ignored and a stage that desperately needs it. For hours he sat at his desk, phone in hand, debating whether it was real, whether he even dared to hope. He typed a reply slowly, carefully. "Dr. Carter, thank you for reaching out. I'd be honored to learn from you. Tell me when and where." He hovered for a moment before hitting send, his heart pounding. The next day, he received her response. It was direct, confident, yet warm. "Let's keep this discreet. Meet me Saturday at 9 a.m. in the Eastbrook University Debate Center. Bring nothing but your voice and your will to fight." Marcus exhaled, relief and apprehension colliding in his chest. He knew secrecy was necessary. If Lawson learned about this, he would find a way to crush it before it began. Saturday morning, Marcus boarded a bus to Eastbrook University, a campus buzzing with activity even at that hour. The debate center stood tall near the center quad, its glass panels gleaming in the early light. He stepped inside, the faint smell of coffee and polished floors surrounding him. Dr. Evelyn Carter was already waiting in the practice hall. She was tall, with natural curls pulled into a neat bun, her posture upright but not rigid. Her eyes, sharp behind a pair of rimless glasses, softened as they landed on Marcus. "You're Marcus," she said, her voice even carrying authority without effort. "Yes, ma'am." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "I saw what you did at the qualifier. No coach, no team. And still you had the room leaning in. That's rare." Marcus swallowed, uncertain how to respond. "Thank you. I just did what I had to." Dr. Carter motioned toward the podium, at the center of the room. "Show me." He hesitated. "Show you. Don't think. Don't plan. Just give me what you gave them. Speak." Marcus stepped slowly to the podium, his palms damp. He drew a breath and launched into one of his practiced openings, the same one that had stunned the judges. The idea that debate was about truth, not image. His voice wavered at first under the scrutiny, but as he spoke the rhythm returned. He felt himself rising, building, pushing the words out with the conviction he had fought to hold on to. When he finished, silence filled the room. Dr. Carter stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Finally she said, "Good. Strong. But raw." She walked toward him, her steps deliberate. "You have conviction, Marcus. That's your gift. But conviction without control can be turned against you. They'll call you emotional. They'll call you angry. You can't give them that excuse." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "That's exactly what Lawson says." Dr. Carter's eyes sharpened. "The difference is, Lawson says it to erase you. I'm saying it so you can protect yourself." The words hit Marcus deep, as if she had peeled back the layers of his frustration and spoken to the wound itself. Over the next few weeks, Marcus traveled in secret to Eastbrook, every other evening. The sessions were grueling but transformative. Dr. Carter drilled him on pacing, on pauses that carried weight, on how to use silence as a weapon. "Again," she'd say, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Stop filling space with words. Command it with silence. Make them lean in." She taught him to anticipate counters, to frame his arguments so tightly that even a clever opponent would struggle to pry them apart. She sharpened his delivery until it felt less like defense and more like precision offense. Cutting, deliberate, undeniable. But most importantly, she taught him resilience. "Marcus, debate isn't just about winning arguments," she said one night, as they sat at the edge of the empty practice hall. "It's about surviving the stories people tell about you while you're still speaking. They'll brand you before you finish your first word. Your job is to make that story collapse under the truth of who you are." Marcus looked down at his hands, calloused from scribbling notes, and holding books late into the night. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. If I'm just fighting a fight, I can't win." Dr. Carter shook her head firmly. "It's always worth it. Because if you stay silent, you're giving them exactly what they want. And if you speak, you force the world to face you, even if it hates what it sees." Marcus felt something shift then. Something heavier than motivation. For the first time, he wasn't just practicing for himself. He was carrying a voice larger than his own. Still, secrecy hung over him like a shadow. He told no one about Dr. Carter, not even his closest classmates. He continued attending Lawson's lectures, raising his hand only to be ignored, scribbling notes as if nothing had changed. Meanwhile, in quiet rooms across town, he was transforming into something Lawson never wanted him to become: undeniable. One evening, after an especially long session, where Dr. Carter drilled him on rapid-fire cross-examination, Marcus sat on the bus home with exhaustion pulling at his body. His phone buzzed with another cruel meme from the student forums, mocking his aggressive voice. He almost deleted it. But then he remembered Dr. Carter's words: "Make their story collapse." He smiled faintly to himself. "They won't be laughing when I'm standing on that stage." As the days ticked closer to nationals, Marcus's confidence grew, but so did the whispers on campus. Julia and Ethan's social media posts became increasingly pointed, mocking independents who don't know their limits. Rumors spread that faculty members were quietly backing Lawson, eager to see Marcus fail so the school's official image remained intact. Marcus ignored them. He had work to do. The night before nationals, Marcus returned from Eastbrook one final time. Dr. Carter had stood before him, her voice firm but encouraging. "You're ready," she said. "Remember, Marcus, you don't owe anyone polish. You owe them truth, and that's what you carry better than anyone I've seen." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you for seeing me." Dr. Carter placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't thank me. Just win." When Marcus reached his dorm, the campus was quiet, the air heavy with the stillness of anticipation. He set his notes neatly on the desk, his blazer draped across the chair. Tomorrow, everything would change. But as he settled into bed, his phone buzzed. He picked it up, expecting a message from Dr. Carter wishing him luck. Instead, the screen showed a new email from Professor Richard Lawson. Marcus's chest tightened as he opened it. The message was brief, but every word dripped with menace. "Mr. Hall, I am aware of your continued insistence on participating in the national competition. Be advised, I have already contacted the event board regarding your eligibility. If you persist, I will ensure you are disqualified before you ever set foot on that stage. Consider this your final warning." Marcus's hands trembled as he read, the weight of the threat pressing down like a stone. The eve of nationals, and Lawson had made his move. On the eve of nationals, Professor Lawson threatened to sabotage Marcus's eligibility. The morning of nationals broke with a pale, bruised sky. The air was sharp, carrying a chill that made Marcus's blazer feel thin against his skin. He had hardly slept. Lawson's email had replayed in his head all night, each word dripping venom. I will ensure you are disqualified before you ever set foot on that stage. Still, Marcus rose early, dressed carefully, and caught the bus to the downtown convention center where the competition would be held. The building loomed large against the skyline, its glass panels glowing with the first hints of sunrise. Students from across the country were already filing in, polished suits, school banners, team coaches barking last-minute advice. Marcus walked alone, his steps measured, his expression calm despite the storm churning inside him. He had Dr. Carter's words echoing in his mind, "Don't thank me, just win." As he entered the registration hall, the energy hit him like a wave. Dozens of universities lined up at booths, their students proudly wearing school pins. The buzz of conversation was electric. Nervous laughter, whispered strategies, last-minute notes. Marcus tightened his grip on his folder and stepped into the line for independence, a much smaller table tucked off to the side. He handed over his ID, his acceptance letter from the open qualifier, and waited. The woman at the desk tapped at her computer, her brow furrowing. "One moment, please," she murmured, reaching for a second folder. Marcus's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. A man in a gray suit approached the desk, clipboard in hand. His expression was polite but stiff. "Mr. Hall?" "Yes," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I'm afraid there's a complication." Marcus's pulse quickened. "What kind of complication?" The man cleared his throat. "We've received a formal objection regarding your eligibility. It appears Professor Richard Lawson, your university's debate director, has filed paperwork stating that you are not an official representative of your school, and therefore should not be competing." Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. His chest tightened, fury rising hot in his veins. "I never claimed to be an official representative. I entered through the open qualifier. Independents are allowed." The man's voice remained even. "Yes, but the objection questions whether your participation creates a conflict with your school's official team. It argues that allowing you to compete undermines the authority of your university's representation." Marcus's jaw clenched. "So because Lawson doesn't want me here, you're considering throwing me out?" Before the man could answer, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me," Dr. Evelyn Carter said sharply, as she strode toward them, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her presence was commanding, her tone leaving no room for dismissal. Marcus Hall qualified fairly through the open bracket. Independent qualifiers exist precisely for students who aren't chosen by their institutions. Filing an objection is not only baseless, it's discriminatory. The man in the gray suit shifted uncomfortably. "Dr. Carter." "No," she interrupted. "I will not let this be swept aside. You know the rules. The open qualifier is an established pathway." Marcus Hall met every requirement. Disqualifying him because his professor doesn't like how he represents the school is an abuse of the system. Other coaches and competitors nearby were beginning to watch, whispers spreading quickly. The air thickened with the tension of a standoff. Marcus stood silent, his heart pounding, his fists tightening at his sides. He felt exposed, like his entire future was being debated in public before he even had the chance to step on stage. The man in gray glanced nervously at the growing audience. "We'll need to consult the board." "Do that," Dr. Carter snapped. "But understand this. If you remove him, it will not be quiet. It will not go unnoticed." The man retreated, leaving Marcus and Dr. Carter standing in the center of the hall, dozens of eyes trained on them. Marcus finally exhaled, his voice low. "He really did it. He really tried to shut me out." Dr. Carter turned to him, her eyes sharp but steady. "Of course he did. Men like Lawson don't just move pawns. They try to flip the whole board. But listen to me, Marcus. You earned this, and I'm not letting him take it away from you." Her conviction steadied him, but the weight of the moment pressed heavy. For the next hour, Marcus sat in the waiting area, every tick of the clock stretching into an eternity. Competitors walked past, some throwing glances filled with pity, others with smug satisfaction. A few whispered openly, "Isn't that the guy Lawson's trying to block?" By the time the man in gray returned, Marcus's nerves were raw. "The board has reviewed the objection," he announced, his voice loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "It has been determined that Marcus Hall, as an independent qualifier, does indeed have the right to compete. His status stands." Relief surged through Marcus, his body nearly buckling with it. He glanced at Dr. Carter, who gave him the faintest nod of victory. But before Marcus could fully breathe, The man continued. However, there will be one condition. To ensure fairness and avoid the perception of conflict with his university's official team, Marcus Hall will be required to compete without any affiliation, including coaching support. He will stand entirely alone. No team, no mentor, no outside assistance. The room buzzed with shock. Marcus's stomach twisted, his relief collapsing into dread. Competing alone had always been his reality, but now even Dr. Carter was being stripped from him. Dr. Carter's face darkened. That's outrageous. Every other competitor here has a coach, a support system. You're singling him out because his professor is threatened by him. The man in gray raised his hands. The decision is final. He may compete, but under this condition. Marcus felt the weight of the words settle like chains. Lawson had lost the battle to disqualify him, but he had still managed to twist the system to Marcus's disadvantage. Alone, entirely alone. He looked at Dr. Carter, his throat tight. So that's it. If I want this chance, I have to do it without you. Her eyes softened, filled with both rage and sorrow. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice low but fierce. Then do it, Marcus. Do it alone. Because if you win like this, no one can ever question that it was all you. Marcus swallowed hard, his chest burning. He thought of his mother, of Lawson's threats, of the students who mocked him. He thought of every time his hand had been ignored in class, every whisper that called him too much, every door slammed before he even knocked. Maybe this was the only way it was ever meant to be. Alone. But undeniable. He nodded slowly, steadying his breath. Then I'll stand alone. The announcement spread quickly, fueling whispers across the hall. Some looked at him with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with quiet respect. But Marcus didn't hear them anymore. His focus narrowed, his determination hardening like steel. If this was the condition, so be it. He had spent years preparing in silence. He knew what it meant to fight unseen. This time, though, he wasn't invisible. The stage was waiting. The decision was made. Marcus would be allowed, but under one condition that raised the stakes even higher. Marcus stood at the edge of the auditorium doors, his name echoing faintly from the announcement inside. The competition had begun. The national stage wasn't just a room. It was an arena. Lights flooded the raised platform at the center. Banners from prestigious universities hung proudly along the walls, and the air hummed with anticipation. Competitors walked with entourages, teams in tailored suits, coaches clutching folders, assistants whispering strategy. The smell of expensive cologne and freshly printed note cards lingered. Marcus had none of that. No banner behind him, no one in his corner, just a worn blazer, a stack of handwritten notes, and the fire in his chest. When his name was called, he walked forward alone. The sound of his shoes against the stage floor seemed louder than the applause that followed. Heads turned, whispers spread instantly through the crowd. That's him, the independent, the one Lawson tried to block. Marcus kept his eyes forward. Each step onto that stage was heavier than the last, but with every stride he forced himself to straighten his shoulders, to breathe evenly. He had lived invisible long enough. Tonight, there would be no hiding. At his podium, he adjusted the microphone. His opponent stood across from him. The team from Yale, crisp in navy blazers with polished shoes, and the kind of confidence that came from years of being told they belonged. They didn't even glance at Marcus at first. One whispered something to the other, both chuckling as if the round was already theirs. The judges, a row of 4 men and 1 woman, shuffled their papers. Their faces were neutral, but Marcus didn't miss the faint arch of a brow when they noticed he had no coach seated behind him. Alone, exposed. The moderator introduced the round, the rules, the topic. Marcus's chest tightened as he listened. Economic policy, wealth disparity, the structure of opportunity. His heart thudded. Of all topics, this one was closest to him. The Yale competitor went first. Their delivery smooth, rehearsed. Their voice was clear, their structure polished. Their arguments threaded with references to economists, historical models, and institutional data. The audience nodded along, exactly what they expected from Yale. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stepped to the podium, the bright lights glaring against his skin. For a moment he froze. The room seemed impossibly large, the silence sharp with judgment. Then he remembered Dr. Carter's words. You don't owe them polish. You owe them truth. He inhaled deeply, gripping the podium. Wealth disparity, he began, his voice steady but rich, isn't just a number on a chart. It's the difference between a child waking up with breakfast on the table or going to school hungry. It's the line between opportunity and exclusion, between being seen as promise and being dismissed as a burden. The shift in the room was immediate. The judges leaned forward slightly. The audience quieted, the whispers fading. Marcus pressed on, weaving policy into humanity, statistics into lived reality. He cited research, yes, but he also told the story of families working 3 jobs just to survive, of communities left behind not because they lacked intelligence, but because the system never intended to see them thrive. His cadence built gradually, each phrase sharper, each pause deliberate. He didn't just deliver arguments, he commanded silence. He let his words hang until the air itself seemed to pulse with weight. Across the stage, the Yale team shifted uncomfortably. Their polish suddenly felt sterile against Marcus's conviction. They fired back with counters, sharp and academic, but Marcus dismantled them calmly. He reframed every attack, turning their precision into fragility. At one point his opponent accused him of emotional framing, their tone dismissive. Marcus didn't flinch. He smiled faintly, then leaned into the microphone. Emotional framing, he said slowly, isn't a weakness when the subject is human lives. To strip emotion from debate is to strip humanity from policy. And what is policy if not the framework of human life? The audience erupted in murmurs, heads nodding, judges scribbling quickly. The Yale debater faltered, their rhythm breaking for the first time. By the time Marcus reached his conclusion, the energy in the room had shifted entirely. His voice rang out, powerful and unwavering. This isn't about polish, it's about justice. And justice demands not the safest voice, but the truest one. That is why I stand here, not as an institution, not as a banner, but as proof that truth will not be silenced. He stepped back, silence held for a single, charged second. Then the applause broke like thunder. The room filled with clapping, cheers, even shouts. Judges leaned back, impressed. Spectators exchanged glances of shock. The Yale team stood stiff, their confidence cracked, their smiles gone. Marcus's chest heaved, his hands trembling slightly, but inside something unshakable had formed. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting to be heard, he was being celebrated. When the round ended, the judges deliberated quickly, their decision announced with no hesitation. Marcus Hall advanced to the semifinals. The audience erupted again, the energy electric. Cameras flashed, students whispered, social media posts began buzzing. Independent competitor defeats Yale. Lone voice advances to semis. Marcus walked off stage, the sound of applause still in his ears. Dr. Carter wasn't allowed in his corner, but he felt her voice inside him, steady and firm. Don't thank me, just win. Backstage, however, the mood was different. Competitors eyed him with a mix of wariness and disdain. Some avoided looking at him altogether. Others smirked, whispering as he passed. He thinks he's a hero. Fluke. Judges went soft on him. Wait till nationals chew him up. Marcus ignored them, his face composed. But inside he knew the battle wasn't over. Winning on stage was one thing. Surviving off it was another. That truth became painfully clear when his phone buzzed later that night. A flood of notifications lit up the screen. Posts on forums, tweets, comments. Some praised him, but many were vicious. He's too aggressive, doesn't know how to debate without yelling. Yeah, typical. All emotion, no intellect. Independent, more like charity case. Enjoy your 15 minutes, Marcus. Semis will humble you. The memes returned, uglier this time. Screenshots of him mid-speech captioned with slurs, comments mocking his tone, his appearance, his very presence on stage. Marcus scrolled for a moment before setting the phone down, his throat tight. He sat in the quiet of his hotel room, staring at the ceiling. The applause from earlier rang in his ears, but so did the whispers. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. He reminded himself of why he was here, not for their approval, not for Lawson, not even for the judges. He was here because his voice mattered. Because silence had never protected him, but truth always could. Still, as the glow of the national stage dimmed, the storm outside grew louder. Marcus advanced to the semifinals, but the backlash outside the stage was only growing. Marcus returned to campus with the echoes of applause still fresh in his memory. The national stage had felt electric, judges leaning forward, the audience erupting in cheers, his words cutting sharper than even he expected. But applause has a short half-life, and by the time he set foot back on the familiar brick walkways of Westfield University, the air was cold. He noticed it first in the silence. Students who used to greet him with nods or casual hellos now passed without a word. Some looked at him, others looked through him, as if he had become transparent. But what cut deeper was the way conversations dipped the moment he entered a room. The half-hidden smirks, the eyes that darted away too late. In the dining hall, whispers trailed him like shadows. He embarrassed us at nationals. Yeah, making it seem like Lawson doesn't know what he's doing. Independent entry. That's not representing us. That's trying to be bigger than the team. Marcus carried his tray to an empty corner, eating in silence, the laughter of his classmates loud behind him. Online, the backlash sharpened. Campus forums lit up with new threads. Marcus Hall, arrogance in a blazer. Who does he think he is? Screenshots of his performance circulated, edited with mocking captions. One post read, Hall thinks he's a savior because he beat Yale. Reality check. He's just a spotlight chaser making our school look like a joke. The comments piled quickly. Exactly. He's making this about him, not the university. Lawson's team is our representation. Hall's just freeloading attention. Arrogant. Classic. The cruelty wasn't faceless. Marcus recognized usernames, people from his classes, students he'd studied with in the library, even acquaintances who once told him he was definitely debate material. Their words sliced deep, betrayal coating every line. But it didn't stop at students. In one of his political science seminars, a professor cleared his throat before beginning the lecture. Before we start, I want to say this. Individual ambition should never come at the expense of collective integrity. Representing an institution requires humility, not ego. His eyes flicked briefly toward Marcus. The message was clear. Even administrators whispered the same story. In a meeting Marcus attended, about campus policy, one dean leaned over to another, not bothering to lower his voice enough. Lawson's right. This boy's overstepped. Nationals isn't about lone wolves. Marcus sat stiff in his chair, heat flooding his face, his pulse hammering in his ears. He kept his gaze steady, but inside every word was a blade turning deeper. What hurt wasn't just the mockery. It was the betrayal. The very people who once cheered for him, who once said, "You're the sharpest student here," now acted as though his success was a stain. They twisted his determination into arrogance, his resilience into defiance. Marcus found himself walking campus differently now. His strides were measured, his eyes straight ahead. He stopped eating, in the dining hall, choosing instead to grab food and retreat to his dorm. He avoided study groups, aware of the whispers that grew the moment he left a room. But the knives didn't just come in whispers. They came in posts. An anonymous article appeared on a student-run blog, Hall's Hollow Victory. It argued that Marcus's independent run undermined the official team, that his ego trip had overshadowed the students who actually represented the school with dignity. It accused him of chasing attention rather than pursuing excellence. Marcus read the article late at night in his dorm. His chest tightened with each sentence. The author's words cut deep, not because they were true, but because so many would believe them. He closed his laptop, pressing his hands to his face. For the first time since stepping on the national stage, he felt something heavier than anger, isolation. But even in that isolation, his determination refused to break. He reminded himself of the applause, of the judge's expressions, of Dr. Carter's steady words. He reminded himself that his voice had carried through a room that never expected to hear him. Still the betrayal gnawed at him. One evening, Marcus walked across campus and spotted Julia and Ethan from Lawson's team, sitting on the steps of the Humanities building. Their laughter floated into the night. As he passed, Julia's voice carried, "Funny how Hall thinks he's a hero. He's just embarrassing us." Ethan chuckled. "Nationals will tear him apart. Can't wait to see him crash." Marcus kept walking, his jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. He wanted to turn, to shout, to demand why his success threatened them so much. But he knew the answer already. His very presence on that stage was a reminder that Lawson's choices weren't absolute. That truth was what they feared. The next morning, Marcus woke to a storm. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts, notifications, alerts. At first he thought it was more memes, more attacks. But as he unlocked the screen, his breath caught. A new post was spreading across campus forums, already gathering comments at a dizzying pace. Leaked email from Professor Lawson. Marcus clicked, his pulse thundering. The screenshot showed an internal message Lawson had sent to another faculty member. The words were stark, undeniable. Students like Hall present poorly at competitions. His tone is too urban, too aggressive. Judges don't respond well to that. Frankly, we need competitors who look and sound like the kind of excellence this university is known for. Marcus's chest tightened as he read. His hands trembled, his vision blurring with rage, and vindication colliding. The comments poured in beneath the post. Wait, did Lawson really say this? Urban. Aggressive? That's racist. Excellence this university is known for. He means white. Just say it. The betrayal of his classmates still burned. But now, for the first time, the target wasn't Marcus. It was Lawson. The mask Lawson had worn for years was cracking, and the entire campus was watching. A leaked email revealed Professor Lawson's racist comments to school officials. The leaked email moved across campus like wildfire. Within hours, it was on every student forum, every group chat, every whispered conversation in hallways and dining halls. By nightfall, it had spread beyond the university. Social media posts tagged the school's account, screenshots circulated, hashtags formed. Marcus watched it all unfold from the corner of his dorm room. His phone buzzed nonstop, each notification a mixture of shock, outrage, or glee. Some students sent him screenshots directly, as if to confirm he'd seen what they had seen. Others offered half-hearted apologies, the kind that carried the weight of guilt but not responsibility. Damn, Marcus. Looks like you were right all along. I didn't think Lawson was that blatant. Sorry if I doubted you. Guess I get it now. But beneath the apologies were more complicated responses. So what now? You gonna blast Lawson? If I were you, I'd focus on the competition. Don't let this distract you. Careful, man. If you push too hard, they'll say you're just being vindictive. Marcus set his phone face down, his chest heavy. The vindication was real. After years of being overlooked, dismissed, quietly erased. Here was proof, hard evidence. Lawson's own words, stripped of pretense, laid bare for all to see. And yet, instead of relief, Marcus felt the crushing weight of choice. If he stayed quiet, focusing solely on the semifinals, people might say he had taken the high road. They might see him as disciplined, unwilling to get caught up in scandal. But silence came with its own cost. Staying quiet meant Lawson's words risked being buried by excuses and bureaucracy, as so many things were. If he spoke, if he called Lawson out publicly, put his voice to the truth that email revealed, he risked being framed as bitter, as a sore loser clinging to victimhood. They would twist his courage into arrogance, his truth into grievance. Either path was a risk. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The hum of his mini-fridge was the only sound in the room. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Baby, don't let them silence you, but also don't let them steal your future. He whispered aloud, his voice trembling. What would silence cost me? What would truth cost me? The weight of that question pressed harder, because Marcus knew he wasn't just carrying himself anymore. Every overlooked black student, every silenced voice in every classroom, every young kid who wondered if their brilliance would ever be seen. He carried them too. By midnight, Marcus was pacing the room. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from Dr. Carter. I saw the email. I know what it means. But remember, you cannot fight every battle at once. Nationals is tomorrow. Decide what matters most right now. Marcus typed back slowly. What if they bury it? Her reply came quickly. Then you speak. But speak at the right time, Marcus. Timing is everything. Don't let Lawson choose the battlefield. You choose it. Marcus dropped the phone onto his bed, his hands shaking. Timing. That was the truth. The storm was here, but he had to decide whether to step into it now or later. The next morning, campus was buzzing with reporters. Local news vans parked along the curb, cameras angled toward the debate building. Students gathered in clusters, their conversations sharp with tension. Lawson's career is over, or he'll smooth it over. People like him always do. Did you see the university's statement? We're investigating. That's code for bury it. Marcus walked through it all with his head high, though his chest burned with the weight of their words. Students glanced at him like he was both a hero and a bomb about to go off. Some nodded in support. Others turned away. In the cafeteria, Julia and Ethan sat together, their voices loud enough for Marcus to hear as he passed. Great. Now everyone's acting like Hall's the victim saint. Julia sneered. Ethan chuckled. Yeah. Give it a week. Lawson will be fine, and Hall will still look like the kid who couldn't stay in his lane. Marcus stopped mid-step, every muscle tense. For a moment, he wanted to confront them, to pour every ounce of rage into the truth they refused to face. But he forced himself forward, his grip tightening around his books until his knuckles ached. By noon, his inbox was flooded. Journalists asking for comment, student groups asking him to speak at rallies, emails from administrators encouraging him to remain neutral until the investigation concluded. Each one added to the storm inside him. He sat in the library, staring at his notes for the semifinals but unable to focus. The words blurred on the page. His mind kept returning to the email, the ugliness of it, the weight of its truth. Students like Hall present poorly, too urban, too aggressive. His jaw clenched. This wasn't just about him. Lawson's words carried centuries of dismissal, the same stereotypes that had silenced countless voices. If Marcus stayed quiet, wasn't he just feeding that silence? And yet, what if speaking now destroyed his momentum at nationals? What if he lost focus and gave Lawson the victory he wanted? As evening fell, Marcus found himself back in his dorm, the decision still unmade. He stood at the window, watching storm clouds gather over the city, their edges bruised and dark. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. Careful what you do next. Some of us still run this place. Marcus froze, his stomach twisting. The message was unsigned, but the threat was clear. Lawson still had allies, powerful ones. He sat heavily on the edge of his bed, staring at the phone in his hands. For a moment, fear pressed harder than conviction. What if speaking the truth not only cost him nationals but his future entirely? But then another thought broke through. Clear, sharp, undeniable. If I don't carry this, who will? Marcus rose, his body trembling with adrenaline. He looked at his notes one last time, then set them aside. His decision wasn't fully formed yet, but one thing was clear. Silence would not protect him. The storm outside cracked open, lightning flashing across the sky. Rain pelted the windows in sudden sheets, the wind howling as if the world itself mirrored his turmoil. Marcus pulled on his blazer, grabbed his folder, and stepped out into the storm. The rain drenched him instantly, but he didn't flinch. Each drop felt like fuel, each clap of thunder like a warning and a promise. When he reached the auditorium, the storm raged harder. Students crowded the entrance, their umbrellas flipping in the wind, their voices drowned by rain and thunder. Inside, the lights glowed, the stage waiting. Marcus paused at the doorway, water dripping from his hair, his chest heaving with determination. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one waiting inside. Lawson's allies, the whispers, the doubt, the weight of expectation. But he stepped forward anyway. Because storms weren't meant to be avoided. They were meant to be walked through. Marcus walked into the semifinals with a storm behind him, literally and figuratively. The storm outside rattled the windows of the National Debate Hall, thunder rolling like an ominous drumbeat. Rain slashed against the glass in furious sheets, streaking the view of the city beyond. Inside, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. The semifinal rounds were about to begin, and the energy was electric, equal parts excitement and tension. Marcus sat alone in the waiting area, his blazer damp from the storm, his notes spread across his lap. Around him, competitors huddled with their coaches, whispering strategies and last-minute reminders. He had no one, no team, no safety net, just the storm outside and the storm inside. The door opened, and an official leaned in. Marcus Hall, you're up. He rose, his legs heavy but steady, his chest filled with the weight of more than arguments. He wasn't walking toward a podium. He was walking toward confrontation, not just with his opponent, but with the invisible walls that had always pressed against him. When he stepped onto the stage, the applause was polite, measured, curious. The whispers carried quickly through the room. That's the independent. The one from the email scandal. Let's see if he can handle pressure now. Across from him stood his opponent, a competitor from Stanford, sharp in a tailored suit, posture relaxed with the kind of confidence that came from a life of being told yes. The Stanford debater smirked as Marcus took his place, as though the outcome were already written. The moderator introduced the round, lightning flashing through the tall windows behind the stage. The topic, government accountability in times of crisis. Marcus's pulse quickened. He had lived this debate long before stepping on this stage. The Stanford debater went first, their delivery flawless. They spoke with ease, citing historical precedents, quoting economists and political theorists. Their words were polished, their cadence practiced. The audience nodded, impressed. It was everything Lawson would have praised: composure, polish, the right image. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stepped to the podium, gripping the wood until his knuckles whitened. Thunder cracked outside, rattling the room. He drew a breath, let the silence stretch a moment longer than expected, then began. Government accountability, he said, his voice steady, isn't just a theory we test in books. It's the difference between survival and collapse. It's a family waiting for relief that never comes. It's a community left in the dark because someone in power decided their suffering was less urgent. The room shifted. The audience leaned forward. Marcus's voice carried not just logic but weight. He wasn't reciting. He was living. He wove statistics with stories, citing numbers but grounding them in the reality of people who bore the consequences of policy failures. He painted images of broken promises, of marginalized voices left unheard in times of crisis, of the way systems abandoned those who didn't fit their definition of worthy. His opponent smirked, waiting for cross-examination. When the chance came, the Stanford debater struck with sharp precision. "Mr. Hall," they said with a pointed smile, "your arguments are compelling, but they're emotional. Debate is about rationality, not personal narratives. Do you expect us to legislate based on feelings?" Marcus inhaled deeply, steadying himself. This was the tactic Lawson had warned of, the stereotype sharpened into a weapon. He leaned slightly into the microphone, his tone calm but unyielding. "Emotion," he said slowly, "is not the absence of reason. It's the evidence of impact. If policies don't reach people's lives, if they don't ease suffering, create opportunity, protect dignity, then what are they for? Numbers without humanity are just numbers. Accountability demands both." The audience erupted in murmurs, judges scribbling furiously. The Stanford debater faltered, then pressed again, this time more condescending. "You make it sound like your experiences are universal truths. They're not. Debate isn't therapy, Mr. Hall. It's argument." Marcus's jaw tightened. He felt the sting of the dismissal, the subtle framing of his perspective, as lesser, as illegitimate, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he let the silence linger, his gaze steady on the judges. "Argument," Marcus said finally, his voice cutting through the silence, "is empty without truth. Debate isn't theater. It's not about who sounds the safest. It's about who forces us to face what we'd rather ignore. And if my truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe that discomfort is the accountability we've all been avoiding." The room froze, then broke into applause. Not polite this time, genuine, loud, undeniable. Even the storm outside seemed to punctuate his words, thunder rolling, as if to underscore his point. The Stanford debater shifted uncomfortably, their composure cracking. Their rebuttals came sharper now, almost desperate, but Marcus remained steady. He dismantled each point with calm precision, reframing their arguments until they collapsed under their own weight. By the time Marcus delivered his closing statement, the room was silent again. Silent not with dismissal, but with attention. "Accountability," Marcus said, his voice low but firm, "isn't about preserving the image of those in power. It's about protecting the lives of those they serve. If we forget that, if we dismiss lived reality as irrelevant, then we are not debating policy. We are debating humanity itself, and humanity cannot afford to lose." He stepped back. For a moment, there was only silence, the storm outside pressing against the glass. Then the applause erupted like thunder. The audience rose to its feet, clapping, cheering, the sound echoing through the hall. The judges exchanged quick glances, their faces breaking into the faintest smiles. Marcus stood still, his chest heaving, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He had given everything he had, laid his truth bare before a room that had never expected to hear it. When the judges announced the result, their words carried more than a score. By unanimous decision, Marcus Hall advances to the final round. The room exploded in applause again, louder than before. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, letting the sound wash over him. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving on stage, he was triumphing. But even in victory, he knew the storm wasn't over. Backstage, his phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, comments, posts, some celebrating, others sharpening into knives. The applause in the room was real, but so was the backlash waiting outside. And as he stepped off the stage, drenched in the glow of triumph. He knew the final battle would be the hardest yet. Marcus won, advancing to the final debate against the most prestigious team in the country. The night of the final round arrived, and the debate hall had transformed into something almost sacred. The storm that had raged the night before had passed, but the tension inside the building now carried its own thunder. The crowd was larger than any prior round. Reporters lined the aisles, cameras poised to capture history. Faculty from universities across the country filled the rows, their polished blazers and clipped voices a reminder that this was more than a competition. It was a stage for reputation, for power, for legacy. Marcus stood backstage, his notes clutched in his hand. His blazer felt heavier than ever, his breaths shallow but deliberate. The murmurs from the audience reached him, whispers carrying his name with a mixture of awe, skepticism, and hostility. That's the independent kid. The one Lawson tried to block. Can he really take down the most prestigious team in the country? His opponent was already at the podium. The debate team from Harvard. Their reputation was unmatched. Their team drilled to near perfection. Two students, both tall, composed and polished, radiated the confidence of people who had been trained since childhood to command rooms like this. Behind them sat their coach, his silver tie glinting beneath the stage lights, his posture exuding assurance. Marcus had no coach, no teammates, no one in his corner. He stood at the edge of the stage, alone, but he had something his opponents did not. Every ignored hand, every silenced answer, every racist dismissal that had tried to erase him. Tonight, those weren't wounds, they were weapons. When the moderator's voice rang out, "Final round, Harvard versus Marcus Hall," independent, the audience erupted into applause. The noise echoed through Marcus's chest, rattling him, but he stepped forward anyway. The topic appeared on the screen behind them. The future of democracy in an age of division. Marcus's pulse quickened. He could feel it, the weight of the question, the way it mirrored his own life, his own struggle to be heard in a world designed to silence him. Harvard opened the round with practiced eloquence. Their first speaker delivered sweeping statements, filled with data, historical references, and lofty language about institutional stability. Their second speaker followed with equal precision, weaving policy frameworks into neat packages that dazzled the judges. The audience nodded, murmuring in approval. When it was Marcus's turn, the room quieted. He stepped to the podium, gripped it with both hands, and let the silence stretch just long enough to demand attention. Then he spoke. "Democracy," he began, his voice low but steady, "is not preserved in speeches polished for applause. It lives or dies in whether people like me, people who've been told to wait their turn, told they don't belong, are allowed to have a voice at all." The words hit the room like a crack of lightning. Heads turned. Judges leaned forward. The Harvard debaters shifted slightly, their confidence faltering for the first time. Marcus pressed forward, his cadence building like a rising storm. He dismantled elitist arguments not with flourish but with clarity. He acknowledged their statistics, then grounded them in the brutal reality of communities ignored. He framed democracy not as a theory but as survival, as something fragile, something easily lost when only a select few are allowed to speak. "Every number you quote," Marcus said, his voice intensifying, "is a person living with the consequences of being ignored. Every policy you defend is meaningless if it protects power but not people. Democracy cannot survive on the voices of the privileged. It survives only when it listens to the voices it once tried to silence." The room was breathless. Harvard struck back hard, their rebuttals sharp and precise. One debater leaned into the microphone, his tone cool, dismissive. "With respect, Mr. Hall, this is a debate. It is not an autobiography. We are here to discuss systems, not personal struggles." Marcus inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Then he smiled faintly, a calm, defiant smile. "And that," he said, his voice firm, "is the problem. You want to talk about democracy as if it's separate from the lives of people who live under it. But democracy isn't an abstract system. It is lived every day by people whose voices are dismissed as inconvenient, too emotional, too aggressive. People like me, people you'd rather ignore." The crowd stirred, whispers rising like a wave. The judges scribbled furiously. The Harvard debaters faltered, their rhythm cracking under the weight of Marcus's truth. By his closing statement, Marcus's voice carried like fire. Every ignored hand, every mocking whisper, every racist remark Lawson had ever made fueled his words. "Tonight," Marcus declared, his tone soaring, "I stand here not as an institution, not as a polished product of a system built to exclude, but as proof that truth doesn't need polish to be undeniable. Democracy demands voices that challenge, voices that disrupt, voices that force us to look at what we'd rather deny. That is why I speak. Not because I was chosen, but because I refuse to be silenced. And if democracy cannot make space for that, then it is no democracy at all. The room exploded. Applause thundered through the hall, louder than anything heard that week. People stood, clapping, shouting, the sound reverberating like a second storm. Judges rose from their seats in ovation. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Marcus stepped back from the podium, his chest heaving, his hands trembling, but his eyes steady. He had poured everything into those words. He had given them not just logic, but life. The judges conferred quickly, their decision announced with gravity. By unanimous decision, the winner of the National Collegiate Debate Competition, Marcus Hall, independent competitor. The roar of the audience shook the room. Marcus's knees nearly buckled as relief and triumph collided inside him. He felt tears sting his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Not yet. The moderator approached with the trophy, a gleaming symbol of victory, and placed it in Marcus's hands. The weight of it pressed down, heavy and surreal, but also freeing. He held it high, the applause crashing over him like waves. In that moment, Marcus wasn't invisible. He wasn't dismissed. He wasn't ignored. He was undeniable. But as the ovations surged, as cameras flashed and the crowd roared, Marcus turned instinctively toward the audience. And there in the second row he saw him, Professor Richard Lawson. The man's face was pale, his eyes wide, his jaw tight. The mask of authority and confidence he always wore was gone. In its place was something Marcus had never seen before: regret. Lawson's gaze locked on Marcus, and for the first time it was Lawson who couldn't look away. As Marcus held the trophy, he turned to see Professor Lawson in the crowd, his face pale with regret. The night Marcus held the trophy in his hands felt like a dream stretched too thin to last. But it did last. By morning the headlines had spread far beyond the debate hall. Independent student defies odds, wins national debate title. Ignored no more. Marcus Hall shatters barriers on national stage. From overlooked to unstoppable, a story of resilience against racism. The internet caught fire. Clips of Marcus's final speech, raw, impassioned, unflinching, circulated widely. Millions watched him stand at the podium, voice cutting through silence with conviction that couldn't be denied. Comments filled the feeds. Praise, admiration, shock at the injustice of his journey. Finally, someone saying what needs to be said. This gave me chills. I wish I had half his courage. But woven among the admiration was a deeper conversation. Why did Marcus have to go through this at all? Why did it take an open qualifier, secret training, and public humiliation to give a brilliant student the stage he deserved from the start? That question wasn't about Marcus alone. It was about a system that had been quietly silencing students for years. And at the center of the storm was Professor Richard Lawson. The leaked email had already stirred outrage. Now, with Marcus's victory amplifying the scrutiny, the university had no choice but to act. Within days, Lawson was summoned to disciplinary hearings. Students protested outside the administration building, carrying signs that read, "Listen to the voices you ignore and no more silence in our halls." News outlets dug deeper, unearthing patterns from Lawson's years at Westfield. Former students came forward, recalling moments of dismissal, subtle remarks, and grading biases that suddenly made sense. The image Lawson had carefully curated as a tough but fair professor was collapsing in real time. Marcus watched it unfold with complicated emotion. Part of him felt vindicated. Justice in some form was happening. But another part felt hollow. No punishment for Lawson could erase the years of invisibility. No headline could return the countless moments he had sat with his hand raised, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. In interviews, Marcus never gloated. He didn't even mention Lawson by name. "I'm grateful for the opportunity," he told a reporter, "but I don't want the focus to be on me versus anyone else. I want the focus to be on the students who are overlooked every day, because I wasn't the first. And if things don't change, I won't be the last." Those words struck chords. Student organizations began inviting Marcus to speak, not just about debate, but about resilience, racism, and representation. His inbox filled with messages from strangers, students across the country, young people who saw themselves in his fight. "I know what it feels like to be the only black student in the room. Thank you for giving me courage to keep raising my hand, even when they look past me. Your story makes me believe my voice matters too. Graduate programs began reaching out. Harvard, Princeton, Yale. Ironically, some of the very institutions his opponents had represented now wanted him. Offers of scholarships, mentorship, and fellowships piled in. But Marcus remained grounded. He still walked across campus with steady steps, books under his arm. He still studied late in the library, not because he needed to prove himself anymore, but because learning had always been his anchor. When asked about his plans, Marcus smiled faintly and said, "I'll go where I can make my voice count, and where I can help others find theirs too." Back on campus, the shift was undeniable. Students who once mocked him now nodded respectfully. Some even apologized, awkwardly. "Marcus, I was wrong about you," one classmate stammered in the dining hall. Marcus gave a polite nod, but nothing more. He had no anger left for them, only clarity. Julia and Ethan, once so confident under Lawson's favor, now avoided his eyes in class. Their social media pages, once filled with bold declarations of victory, were eerily quiet. In the lecture hall, Marcus sat in his usual seat near the middle. For the first time in 2 years, his hand rose, not because he expected recognition, but because he had never stopped believing in his own worth. The silence stretched. The new interim professor, filling in during Lawson's suspension, pointed to him immediately. "Yes, Marcus." His voice rang out steady, filled with the same conviction that had carried him through nationals. The class listened, and this time, there was no dismissal, no ignoring. His words filled the room, undeniable. Still, Marcus knew the story wasn't just his. One evening, sitting by his dorm window, he replayed the journey in his mind. The quiet nights of practicing alone, the cruel memes, the secret mentorship, the storm that mirrored his fight. He thought of Lawson's pale face, in the audience, regret carving lines into a man who had tried to bury him. But what haunted Marcus wasn't Lawson. It was the question left behind. How many voices never get this chance? How many brilliant students remain invisible because no one bothers to look? The thought pressed against him like a shadow, heavier than any trophy. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the national trophy gleaming faintly on his desk. To others it was proof of victory. To him, it was a reminder of every hand that still hung unseen in classrooms across the country. Because the truth was this: he had won. Yes, but the silence wasn't over. The world would remember Marcus Hall. But the greater question, the haunting one, would remain for everyone else to answer. How many other brilliant voices remain ignored, simply because no one is willing to listen? Stories like Marcus's happen every day. Brilliance ignored, voices silenced, doors slammed shut, but silence only wins if we let it. If you believe every voice deserves to be heard, type yes in the comments and subscribe if this story broke your heart.